When the elite members of SEAL Team Delta walked into Iron Summit Fitness that Tuesday morning, they expected to dominate every piece of equipment like they dominated every other physical challenge in their lives. What they didn't expect was the quiet woman in the corner who had been waiting her entire adult life for someone to finally notice what she was really capable of. By the end of that session, these warriors would question everything they thought they knew about human strength limits. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell arrived at Iron Summit Fitness every morning at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before the gym officially opened. The night security guard, Tom Rodriguez, had grown used to seeing her silver Subaru Outback in the same parking spot each day, positioned with a clear view of the main entrance and both emergency exits. She told herself it was just good planning, though she couldn't quite remember when checking escape routes had become as automatic as breathing. The fitness center occupied a converted warehouse in the industrial district of Norfolk, Virginia. Its concrete floors and exposed steel beams gave it the no-nonsense atmosphere that serious lifters preferred over the chrome and mirrors of commercial chains. Sarah moved through her pre-workout routine with mechanical precision, checking her gear bag that contained items most gym-goers would find unusual, testing the equipment she'd need, and performing mobility exercises that seemed excessive for someone planning a standard workout. Her fellow gym members knew her as Sarah, the quiet software developer who worked remotely and never missed a training session. She helped elderly members load plates, never hogged equipment during peak hours, and always wiped down her stations with the thoroughness of someone who understood the importance of maintaining shared resources. Her workouts were consistent but unremarkable to casual observers. She lifted respectable weights, never grunted or drew attention to herself, and finished each session looking like she could easily do it all over again. Sarah's apartment reflected the same calculated simplicity as her gym persona. A modest two-bedroom unit in a complex that didn't require extensive background verification. Furniture arranged to allow quick movement toward multiple exits. A kitchen stocked with exactly what she needed for optimal nutrition, nothing more. The only items that might have raised questions were the resistance bands rated for forces that would snap conventional equipment, and the pull-up bar installed with hardware specifications that seemed excessive for a woman who claimed to weigh 135 pounds. Her neighbors in the Riverside Gardens complex knew her as the helpful tech worker who fixed Mrs. Chen's computer problems, and never complained about the college students' loud parties. They didn't know that Sarah could identify the engine specifications of motorcycles by sound alone, or that she unconsciously tracked the movement patterns of everyone in her peripheral vision, or that she'd installed motion detection systems disguised as smart home devices throughout her building's common areas. The scars were expertly hidden beneath carefully chosen athletic wear, surgical marks on her shoulders, usually covered by tank top straps that she claimed helped with old swimming injuries, the compression marks on her lower back, masked by lifting belts she insisted were necessary for proper form. The faint surgical lines around her knuckles explained away as childhood accidents to the few who glimpsed them during equipment adjustments. Sarah's training regimen was carefully designed to appear conventional while developing capabilities that were decidedly not. She performed exercises that built functional strength for real-world applications, not just aesthetic muscle development. Her endurance work assumed scenarios where fatigue wasn't an option for survival. Her flexibility training went far beyond injury prevention, extending to mobility requirements that most fitness enthusiasts wouldn't recognize as necessary. The key to staying healthy, she would tell curious gym members, is consistency over intensity. But the real key was maintaining capabilities that could be activated when consistency wasn't enough. Marcus Thompson, a construction foreman who'd been training at Iron Summit for 2 years, noticed that Sarah moved differently than other lifters. There was an efficiency to her movements, a way of handling weights that seemed to account for variables beyond the specific exercise. When Sarah loaded barbells, her hand positioning and body mechanics suggested muscle memory developed far beyond any personal training certification. "Where did you learn to lift like that?" Marcus asked one morning after watching her perform deadlifts with form that was textbook perfect, yet somehow more refined than what he'd learned from competitive powerlifters. "Here and there," Sarah replied, the same answer she gave to all such questions. "You figure out what works when you pay attention to your body's feedback." Quote, the truth was that Sarah had learned her training methods in facilities that officially didn't exist, from instructors whose credentials weren't in any database During preparation for missions that never appeared in Pentagon briefings, she'd spent 4 years becoming someone else entirely, then 3 more years becoming no one at all, before finally settling into the carefully constructed simplicity of Sarah Mitchell, software developer and fitness enthusiast. The morning that would change everything started like every other Tuesday. Sarah completed her dynamic warm-up, checked her training log, and began her scheduled workout with the methodical approach that had kept her invisible for 6 years. The gym was nearly empty at this hour, populated only by the most dedicated early risers who preferred training without crowds or distractions. She was 45 minutes into her session, working through a seemingly routine upper body circuit, when the front doors opened with more force than necessary. 6 men entered with the unmistakable bearing of military personnel, their movements coordinated despite being in civilian clothes. Their conversation carried the casual confidence of people accustomed to being the most physically capable individuals in any room they entered. Sarah recognized the type immediately, though she continued her set without obvious reaction. Elite military, probably special operations based on their conditioning and the way they surveyed the facility before beginning their workouts. Their gear bags were expensive and well-maintained, their athletic wear was high quality but understated, and their approach to equipment selection showed familiarity with serious strength training. Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison led the group, a man whose presence seemed to command attention without effort. His teammates, Rodriguez, Patterson, Williams, Cooper, and Davis, moved with the easy confidence of people who had tested their physical limits in environments where failure had consequences beyond embarrassment. They were everything Central Casting would order for elite warriors taking a break from saving the world. Finally, a real gym, Harrison announced to his team as they surveyed the weights and equipment. None of that fitness center nonsense, with machines that do all the work for you. This is where we can actually train like we mean it. Quote, Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came when people spoke about training as if it were a competition rather than preparation. She focused on her breathing, maintaining the rhythm that had kept her centered through challenges these sailors couldn't imagine. 4 counts in, 7 hold, 8 out. The pattern that had sustained her through longer nights than these men had experienced. The SEAL team's workout was impressive and intimidating. Compound movements executed with perfect form. Weights that would challenge experienced powerlifters. Cardiovascular conditioning that would exhaust most athletes. Several other gym members stopped their own workouts to watch, clearly inspired by the display of elite fitness. Sarah continued her own training, maintaining the same unremarkable routine she'd followed for years. To casual observers, the contrast was obvious. 6 elite warriors pushing the limits of human performance, and 1 ordinary woman going through the motions of a standard fitness program. The SEALs occasionally glanced in her direction with the polite indifference reserved for amateur lifters who didn't understand what real training looked like. What none of them noticed was the weight Sarah was actually moving, disguised by her smooth technique and lack of dramatic effort. What they missed was the way she positioned herself to maintain visual contact with all 6 men while appearing to focus solely on her exercises. What they couldn't see was that Sarah Mitchell, software developer, was conducting her own assessment of their capabilities while maintaining the perfect facade of someone who belonged in a completely different category of gym membership. The stage was set for a collision between carefully constructed anonymity and the kind of professional pride that made assumptions about who deserved respect in environments where strength mattered. Sarah had spent 6 years perfecting the art of being underestimated. She was about to discover whether that preparation would be enough when her invisible world collided with people trained to notice what others missed. The SEAL team had been training at Iron Summit for 45 minutes when Sarah began the portion of her workout that required the heaviest equipment. She moved toward the squat rack with the same unhurried pace she'd maintained throughout her session, her approach so unremarkable that most people wouldn't have given it a second glance. Marcus Thompson was resetting the cable machine nearby when he noticed Sarah loading the Olympic barbell. He'd seen her squat before, always with respectable weight and perfect form, but today something was different. She was adding plates with a systematic precision that suggested she was preparing for something significant. 2 45-pound plates on each side, then another pair. Marcus paused his own workout to watch, curious about where this was heading. Sarah continued loading weight with the mechanical efficiency of someone following a predetermined plan. Another pair of plates. Then smaller increments, adding tens and fives with the careful calculation of someone who knew exactly what she intended to accomplish. The SEAL team was working through their own routine on the opposite side of the gym, their conversations carrying the easy camaraderie of people who had tested their limits together in environments where teamwork meant survival. They were focused on their own training, occasionally glancing around the gym with the casual awareness of people accustomed to being the most physically impressive individuals in any fitness facility. Lieutenant Commander Harrison was spotting Rodriguez on the bench press when the sound of heavy weights settling onto a barbell caught his attention. He looked over to see Sarah completing her setup at the squat rack, the bar now loaded with what appeared to be significantly more weight than he would have expected from someone of her apparent training level. "How much weight is that?" Rodriguez asked, following Harrison's gaze as he sat up from the bench. Patterson, who had the best eye for weight estimation among the team, studied Sarah's setup from across the gym. "Looks like 315, maybe 325. He shook his head slightly. "That's gotta be a mistake. There's no way someone her size is squatting that kind of weight." Williams paused his own workout to observe. Maybe she's just loading the bar for someone else, probably waiting for her training partner to show up. But Sarah wasn't waiting for anyone. She positioned herself under the barbell with the methodical precision of someone who had performed this movement thousands of times. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Prepared to lift weight that should have been impossible for someone of her apparent capabilities. The gym had grown quieter as other members began to notice what was happening. Marcus had stopped pretending to work out and was watching openly, his expression shifting from curiosity to amazement. The elderly gentleman who arrived every morning at 5:30 had paused his walking routine to observe. Even the staff member cleaning equipment had slowed his work to see what would happen next. Sarah lifted the weight from the rack with smooth efficiency, stepping back to establish her squat position. The loaded barbell that had looked impossibly heavy moments before now appeared perfectly balanced across her shoulders. Her stance was textbook perfect, but there was something more refined about her positioning, a stability that suggested capabilities beyond conventional strength training. The first repetition was flawless. Sarah descended into a full squat with controlled precision, paused briefly at the bottom position, then drove upward with explosive power that made the movement look effortless. The weight that should have challenged an experienced male powerlifter was handled like a standard working set. Cooper stopped mid-repetition on his own exercise, staring across the gym with the expression of someone witnessing something that didn't fit his understanding of how things worked. Did she just squat 325 for a warm-up representative? The second repetition was identical to the first. Perfect form, controlled descent, explosive ascent. Sarah's breathing remained steady, her expression calm, showing no signs of the strain that should have been obvious when handling near maximum weight. Davis put down his dumbbells entirely, his attention now focused solely on Sarah's performance. "That's not possible. Look at her size. That's more than twice her body weight, and she's making it look easy." The third repetition confirmed what everyone was beginning to realize. This wasn't a struggle or a personal record attempt. This was Sarah's normal training weight, performed with the casual efficiency of someone for whom this level of strength was simply routine. Harrison found himself calculating the weight-to-body weight ratio in his head, coming up with numbers that didn't make sense based on conventional understanding of human performance limits. He'd seen elite female athletes, military personnel who had dedicated their careers to physical development, and competitive powerlifters who specialized in maximum strength. What he was watching exceeded all of those categories. Sarah completed her set of 5 repetitions with the same mechanical precision she'd shown throughout. She re-racked the weight with careful attention to proper positioning, then stepped away from the squat rack, as if she'd just finished a routine warm-up exercise. Her breathing was slightly elevated, but not labored. Her expression remained the same calm focus she'd maintained throughout her workout. The silence in the immediate area was noticeable. Other gym members who had witnessed the display were exchanging glances, trying to process what they'd seen. Marcus approached the squat rack after Sarah moved away, curious to confirm the weight he'd observed. His count verified what everyone suspected but couldn't quite believe. 335 pounds, he announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and disbelief. She just squatted 335 for 5 reps like it was her warm-up weight. The SEAL team's conversation had stopped entirely, 6 elite warriors who prided themselves on superior physical conditioning were struggling to understand how they'd completely misassessed the capabilities of someone they'd categorized as an amateur fitness enthusiast. Rodriguez was the first to voice what they were all thinking. That changes everything we thought we knew about the people training here. Sarah continued her workout routine as if nothing unusual had occurred. She moved to the next exercise in her program, a complex deadlift variation that required technical skill as well as raw strength. Once again, she loaded weight that seemed impossible for someone of her apparent training background. Patterson watched her set up with growing amazement. She's loading 4 plates for deadlifts. That's 405 pounds. He looked around at his teammates, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what they were witnessing. How is that even possible? Williams had taken out his phone, not to record but to calculate. If she weighs what she looks like she weighs, that's close to a 3 times body weight deadlift. That's elite powerlifter territory, not recreational fitness level. The deadlift performance was as flawless as the squats had been. Sarah approached the loaded barbell with the same methodical precision, established her grip and stance with expert positioning, then executed the lift with technical perfection that made 400 pounds look manageable. Cooper shook his head in amazement. That's not just strength. That's years of specialized training, probably decades. You don't develop that kind of power and technique as a hobby. Davis was studying Sarah's movement patterns with the analytical focus of someone trying to solve a puzzle. Look at her positioning. She's not just strong, she's technically perfect. That's the kind of form you only see from people who've had professional coaching at the highest levels. The gym's atmosphere had shifted completely. What had started as a normal Tuesday morning workout had become an inadvertent demonstration of capabilities that challenged everyone's assumptions about human performance. Sarah continued training with the same unremarkable demeanor she'd maintained for years, but her cover as an ordinary gym member was beginning to unravel under the weight of undeniable evidence. Harrison gathered his team for a quiet conference away from the general gym area. The conversation that followed would mark the beginning of questions that Sarah had spent 6 years hoping no one would think to ask. The woman they dismissed as another recreational lifter had just demonstrated strength levels that exceeded most of their own personal records. The investigation into who Sarah Mitchell really was had begun, whether she wanted it or not. Lieutenant Commander Harrison approached Sarah as she was completing her cool-down stretches, his team following at a respectful distance. The casual confidence they displayed earlier had been replaced by something closer to professional curiosity mixed with genuine respect. "Excuse me, miss," Harrison began, his tone carrying the measured politeness of someone who had reassessed an entire situation. "I'm Jake Harrison. My team and I couldn't help but notice your lifting performance today. That was some seriously impressive strength work." Sarah looked up from her stretching routine, her expression maintaining the same friendly but unremarkable demeanor she'd cultivated for 6 years. "Thank you. Just trying to stay consistent with my training." Rodriguez stepped forward slightly, unable to contain his amazement. "Ma'am, with all due respect, what we just witnessed wasn't recreational fitness. That was elite-level performance. Where did you develop that kind of strength?" The question Sarah had been dreading for years hung in the air between them. She could deflect, minimize, redirect their attention elsewhere. But looking at 6 faces that showed genuine respect rather than casual dismissal, she found herself reconsidering the careful boundaries she'd maintained. "Here and there," Sarah replied, using her standard deflection. "You pick up techniques when you focus on what actually works rather than what looks impressive." Patterson, who had been quietly calculating numbers throughout their observation, spoke up. "Ma'am, those weren't techniques we were watching. That was raw power combined with technical precision that takes years to develop. That squat-to-bodyweight ratio puts you in the top percentile of strength athletes globally." Williams nodded in agreement. "And the deadlift form was textbook perfect. That's not something you learn from YouTube videos or casual gym training. That's professional-level coaching, and probably decades of consistent development." Sarah felt the familiar sensation of carefully constructed anonymity beginning to crack under professional scrutiny. These weren't amateur fitness enthusiasts impressed by novelty. These were elite athletes who understood exactly what they'd witnessed and knew it didn't match her presented background. Cooper, who had been studying her movement patterns throughout the workout, added his observation. "It's not just the weight, it's the efficiency. You move like someone who's trained for functional application, not just gym performance." That's military-grade strength conditioning. The word military hit Sarah like a physical impact. She'd known this moment would eventually come, had prepared for it, but the reality was more unsettling than the anticipation. Davis, who had remained quiet during the initial approach, stepped forward with the measured tone of someone making an important connection. "Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but would you happen to have any background in specialized strength training? Because what we observe today exceeds the performance levels of most military personnel we've worked with." Quote. Sarah looked around the group, seeing faces that had shifted from casual curiosity to professional recognition. These weren't random gym members asking about her workout routine. These were elite military personnel who had begun to ask the kinds of questions that led to classified answers. "I prefer to keep my training background private," Sarah said carefully, "but I appreciate your interest in my workout." Harrison's expression showed understanding rather than frustration at her deflection. "Ma'am, I want to be direct with you. My team and I are Navy SEALs. We've worked with elite athletes, strength specialists, and military personnel from various specialized programs. What we witnessed today was beyond the capabilities of most people in those categories." The revelation of their military status confirmed what Sarah had suspected from their first moments in the gym. The coincidence felt less like chance and more like the universe's way of ensuring that some connections were inevitable. Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, his voice carrying a tone of growing recognition. "Ma'am, there are very few programs that develop the kind of strength-to-weight ratios you just demonstrated. Most of them are classified above our clearance level." The silence that followed was heavy with implications that no one wanted to voice explicitly. Sarah found herself at the crossroads she'd been avoiding for 6 years. Continue the deflection and risk arousing more suspicion, or acknowledge enough truth to satisfy their curiosity without revealing everything she'd worked to hide. "Some training programs are more comprehensive than others," Sarah said quietly, "but that's all in the past. Now I just try to maintain my fitness and help other people with their goals when I can." Williams, who had been reviewing something on his phone, looked up with an expression that combined amazement with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, I've been researching the performance numbers we observed. Your squat places you in the top 5% of equipped powerlifters globally, and you performed it raw with perfect form. That's not maintenance training. That's an elite competition level." Patterson nodded in agreement. "And the deadlift puts you in competition range with people who train exclusively for that one movement. You're performing at levels that most specialists never reach, and you're doing it as part of a complete workout routine." Quote. Sarah felt the weight of 6 years of carefully maintained anonymity pressing against the growing evidence of her true capabilities. The strength she'd tried to hide had been displayed in front of exactly the people most qualified to recognize what it represented. "I've always been naturally strong," Sarah offered, knowing the explanation was insufficient but hoping it might redirect their investigation. Cooper shook his head respectfully. "Ma'am, with all due respect, natural strength doesn't account for the technical precision we observed. That level of movement quality comes from specialized instruction by people who understand optimal human performance at the highest levels." Harrison stepped closer, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had made a decision. "Ma'am, I'm going to be completely honest with you. My team has worked with strength specialists from various classified programs. Your performance today matches or exceeds capabilities we've only seen from personnel with backgrounds in programs that officially don't exist." The direct challenge forced Sarah to make a choice she'd been postponing for years: continue the fiction and risk deeper investigation, or acknowledge enough truth to satisfy their curiosity while maintaining operational security. "Some programs prepare people for situations where normal human limits aren't sufficient," Sarah said carefully. "But those programs end, and the people who participated in them eventually return to normal lives." The admission was subtle but unmistakable to people trained to read between lines of classified information. Davis straightened slightly, recognizing the confirmation of what they'd all begun to suspect. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said with genuine respect, "whatever program you were part of, thank you for your service. And thank you for demonstrating that elite capabilities don't always come with obvious identification." Williams nodded in agreement. "We owe you an apology for our initial assumptions. When we walked in here this morning, we thought we were the most physically capable people in the facility." Sarah smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "You probably still are. Strength is just one measurement of capability, and there are many different ways to be effective." Patterson looked around at his teammates, then back to Sarah. Would you be willing to share any training insights? Because what we witnessed today suggests you know things about human performance that could benefit people in our line of work. The question represented everything Sarah had tried to avoid for 6 years. Visibility, recognition, the possibility of being drawn back into a world she'd worked to escape. But looking at 6 faces that showed genuine respect rather than casual curiosity, she found herself reconsidering the boundaries she'd maintained. "Maybe we could discuss training philosophy sometime," Sarah said carefully. "But for now, I need to finish my session and get to work." Harrison nodded respectfully. "Of course. But if you're ever willing to share insights about strength development, we'd be honored to learn from someone with your capabilities." As Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared to leave, she felt the familiar sensation of a carefully constructed identity beginning to evolve. She'd spent 6 years perfecting the art of being invisible, unremarkable, forgotten. But sometimes the most effective way to disappear was to hide in plain sight among people who understood exactly what they were looking at. The woman who had entered Iron Summit Fitness as Sarah Mitchell, software developer, was leaving as someone whose true capabilities had been recognized and respected by elite warriors. The ghost had been revealed, acknowledged, and chosen to remain exactly where she belonged, helping people become stronger, one workout at a time. And somewhere in the unofficial records of SEAL Team Delta, a note would be added that gym members should never be underestimated, especially the quiet ones who lifted impossible weights with perfect form while claiming to be ordinary software developers who just tried to stay consistent with their training. The weeks following their encounter at Iron Summit Fitness brought subtle changes to the gym's atmosphere. Word had spread quietly among the serious lifters about Sarah's extraordinary display, but the story had taken on the mythical quality that exceptional performances often acquire. Some claimed she'd squatted 400 pounds. Others insisted they'd witnessed a 500-pound deadlift. The truth, impressive enough on its own, became secondary to the legend. Marcus Thompson found himself studying other seemingly ordinary gym members with new attention, wondering what capabilities might be hidden beneath unremarkable facades. The elderly gentleman who arrived every morning at 5:30 revealed that he'd been a competitive weightlifter in his youth, setting regional records that had stood for decades. The quiet woman who used the elliptical machines exclusively turned out to be a former marathon runner who had competed in the Olympic trials. Sarah continued her routine unchanged, arriving at precisely the same time and following the same methodical approach to training. But the SEAL team's presence had introduced a new dynamic to her carefully controlled environment. They began arriving earlier, their workout schedules gradually aligning with hers in what appeared to be coincidental timing but felt more purposeful. The interactions remained professional and respectful. Harrison would nod acknowledgement when their paths crossed. Rodriguez offered to spot her during heavy lifts, though Sarah politely declined, explaining that she preferred to work within weights she could handle independently. Williams asked technical questions about her lifting technique, conversations that revealed his genuine interest in understanding optimal movement patterns. 3 weeks after their initial encounter, Patterson approached Sarah with a request that would test the boundaries she'd established. His younger brother, recently discharged from the Army after an injury, was struggling to maintain the fitness standards he'd built during his military service. Traditional gym programs weren't providing the results he needed, and his confidence was suffering along with his physical capabilities. "I was wondering if you might be willing to provide some guidance," Patterson explained. "Not formal training, just insights about effective strength development. He's having trouble transitioning from military fitness protocols to civilian gym routines." Sarah found herself considering the request more seriously than she would have expected. Helping individual people had always been the core motivation behind her civilian identity. The fact that this person was a veteran dealing with readjustment challenges made the decision easier. "I'd be happy to discuss training principles with him," Sarah replied. "But I should mention that my methods might be more intensive than what he's used to from conventional programs." The meeting with Patterson's brother Michael took place on a quiet Saturday morning when the gym was nearly empty. Sarah had expected someone struggling with motivation and confidence. Instead, she met a focused young man whose injury had forced him to completely rebuild his approach to physical training. Michael's left shoulder had been damaged by shrapnel during his deployment, limiting his range of motion and forcing him to abandon many of the exercises that had formed the foundation of his military fitness routine. Traditional rehabilitation had restored basic function, but he couldn't achieve the strength levels that had defined his identity as a soldier. Sarah studied his movement patterns during a basic assessment, identifying compensations and limitations that conventional trainers might miss. Her recommendations were precise and unconventional, focusing on exercises that worked around his restrictions while building strength through alternative movement patterns. Try this variation. Sarah demonstrated a modified pressing movement that engaged his shoulder without triggering the pain responses that had been limiting his progress. The goal isn't to replicate what you used to do, but to develop what you can do now more effectively. Michael's response to her guidance was immediate and dramatic. Within 2 sessions, he was moving weights that exceeded his pre-injury personal records, using techniques that worked with his limitations rather than against them. His confidence returned along with his strength, and word of Sarah's unconventional but effective methods began to spread among other veterans struggling with similar challenges. Cooper approached Sarah the following week with a different kind of request. His unit was preparing for a specialized deployment that would require exceptional physical conditioning under extreme circumstances. Their traditional training protocols were comprehensive, but might not address the specific demands they would face. "We're not asking for classified information," Cooper clarified. "But if you have insights about preparing for situations where normal fitness standards aren't sufficient, we'd appreciate any guidance you could share." Sarah found herself drawn into conversations about training philosophy that went far beyond basic strength development. She discussed adaptation strategies for environments where equipment wasn't available, nutrition protocols for sustained high-performance demands, and recovery methods that worked when rest wasn't an option. Her insights revealed an understanding of scenarios that most fitness professionals never encountered. She spoke about maintaining capabilities under stress, developing mental resilience alongside physical strength, and preparing for unknown challenges with systematic comprehensiveness. Davis, who had been listening to these conversations with growing amazement, finally voiced what his teammates were all thinking. "Ma'am, the level of knowledge you're sharing suggests experience with training protocols that are classified well above our clearance level. This isn't theoretical understanding. This is a practical application of methods we've only heard rumors about." The observation forced Sarah to confront the reality that her carefully maintained boundaries were becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. Helping people required sharing knowledge, and sharing knowledge inevitably revealed more about her background than she'd intended to disclose. "Some training programs are designed for situations that most people never encounter," Sarah acknowledged, "but the principles translate to any environment where exceptional performance is required." Williams nodded thoughtfully. "And those principles suggest that whoever designed your training understood human limitations as starting points rather than endpoints." The conversation that followed would mark the beginning of a new chapter in Sarah's carefully constructed civilian life. 6 elite warriors who had initially dismissed her as an amateur gym member were beginning to understand that they had encountered someone whose capabilities exceeded their own, developed through programs that pushed human performance beyond conventional boundaries. The quiet software developer who lifted impossible weights was about to become something more visible, more connected to the community of people who understood that exceptional capabilities often came with exceptional responsibilities. Sarah Mitchell was evolving from someone who hid her past to someone who used her past to help others build better futures. And at Iron Summit Fitness, the early morning hours had become a gathering place for people who understood that true strength was measured not by what you could lift, but by what you chose to do with the capabilities you'd been given. The transformation of Iron Summit's early morning community accelerated when Dr. Elena Vasquez joined their informal group. A sports medicine physician who specialized in treating elite athletes, she had been referred to Sarah by Michael Patterson after witnessing his remarkable recovery progress. Dr. Vasquez arrived expecting to meet a talented personal trainer. Instead, she encountered someone whose understanding of human biomechanics exceeded that of most exercise physiologists. "Your rehabilitation protocols are producing results that shouldn't be possible," Dr. Vasquez told Sarah during their first meeting. "Michael's shoulder mobility has improved beyond what our medical projections indicated, and his strength gains are occurring in patterns that suggest you understand neuromuscular adaptation at a level that most professionals never reach." Sarah's response revealed knowledge that went far beyond conventional fitness education. She discussed fascial release techniques used in military medical facilities, spoke about adaptation strategies developed for personnel recovering from combat injuries, and demonstrated assessment methods that could identify compensation patterns invisible to standard evaluations. Dr. Vasquez found herself taking notes during their conversations, documenting insights that could revolutionize her approach to treating patients with complex movement limitations. "Where did you learn these techniques?" she asked, echoing the question that everyone seemed to ask Sarah eventually. "You encounter different approaches when working with people who can't afford to accept conventional limitations," Sarah replied, maintaining her careful balance between truth and disclosure. The doctor's presence added a new dimension to the group's understanding of what Sarah represented. Someone with advanced medical training was seeking guidance from a supposed software developer, treating her knowledge as authoritative rather than amateur. The implications were becoming impossible to ignore. Harrison organized what he described as a casual strength demonstration for his extended team, including members from other SEAL units who had heard rumors about the extraordinary civilians they'd encountered. The event was unofficial and voluntary, held at Iron Summit during weekend hours when the facility was available for private use. 8 Navy SEALs gathered to witness what their colleagues had described as impossible performance levels from someone with no apparent military background. Sarah agreed to participate, understanding that declining would create more suspicion than demonstrating her capabilities in a controlled environment. The informal competition began with standard powerlifting movements. Sarah's squat performance exceeded every team member's personal record, executed with technical precision that made maximum effort appear routine. Her deadlift numbers placed her in competitive ranges with elite male athletes, performed with the smooth efficiency of someone operating well within her actual capabilities. But the most impressive displays came during functional strength tests that the SEALs had designed to simulate real-world scenarios, weighted carry exercises that simulated moving injured teammates across difficult terrain, rope climbing with additional weight that replicated carrying essential equipment, obstacle courses that combined strength, endurance, and coordination under conditions designed to expose weaknesses. Sarah completed every challenge not just successfully but with margins that suggested she was still operating within comfortable limits. Her performance during the weighted carries exceeded what most team members could achieve. Her rope climbing technique was so efficient that she appeared to be defying gravity rather than overcoming it. The most telling moment came during a complex exercise that required maintaining precise hand positioning while supporting body weight in increasingly difficult positions. The movement was designed to test grip strength, core stability, and mental resilience simultaneously. Most team members reached failure within 90 seconds. Sarah maintained the position for over 4 minutes, her breathing controlled and her expression calm throughout. When she finally released and dropped to the ground, it was by choice rather than muscular failure. Lieutenant Commander Thompson, who had been brought in specifically to evaluate Sarah's performance, approached her with the expression of someone who had witnessed something that challenged his fundamental understanding of human capabilities. "Ma'am, I've worked with strength specialists from every branch of military service and several allied nations," Thompson said. "What we've observed today exceeds the performance levels of personnel from the most elite programs in our database. This isn't recreational fitness or even competitive athletics. This is preparation for scenarios that most people never encounter." Quote, Rodriguez, who had been documenting the session for training analysis, reviewed his notes with growing amazement. "Every performance metric we've recorded places her in the top percentile of military specialists globally. We're not just talking about strength. We're talking about comprehensive physical preparation for extreme scenarios." The conversation that followed marked the final dissolution of Sarah's carefully maintained anonymity. 8 elite warriors were asking direct questions about training programs that were classified above their clearance levels, seeking explanations for capabilities that suggested involvement in operations that officially never existed. Cooper voiced what everyone was thinking. "Ma'am, there are very few explanations for the performance levels we've witnessed. Either you represent some kind of genetic anomaly that has never been documented, or you've received training from programs that are classified beyond our access." Sarah found herself at the crossroads she'd been avoiding for years. The evidence of her capabilities was now overwhelming, witnessed by too many people with too much expertise to explain away with deflections about natural talent or recreational training. "Some programs prepare people for situations where conventional human limitations can't be accepted," Sarah said quietly, But those programs end, and the people who participated eventually transitioned to different kinds of service. Williams nodded slowly, recognizing the careful admission. And that transition might involve using those capabilities to help other people develop their own potential. The acknowledgement was subtle, but unmistakable. Sarah's role at Iron Summit wasn't just about maintaining her own fitness. It was about applying extraordinary capabilities to help others overcome their limitations, whether those were physical rehabilitation needs, performance goals, or preparation for demanding assignments. Thompson studied Sarah with the analytical focus of someone trained to identify strategic assets. Ma'am, if you're willing to share insights about advanced training methodologies, there are people who could benefit from that knowledge. People whose missions require capabilities that conventional programs don't develop. The invitation represented everything Sarah had worked to avoid since establishing her civilian identity. Visibility, official recognition, the possibility of being drawn back into classified operations. But it also represented an opportunity to apply her capabilities in service to people who needed advantages that normal training couldn't provide. I'd be willing to discuss training philosophy with people who understand that exceptional performance requires exceptional preparation, Sarah replied carefully. But any such discussions would need to respect certain boundaries about specific methodologies. Harrison nodded respectfully. Of course. We understand that some knowledge comes with restrictions, but even general principles from someone with your background could make the difference between success and failure for people facing extreme challenges. The informal demonstration had evolved into something more significant. Sarah Mitchell, software developer and fitness enthusiast, was being invited to become a consultant for elite military personnel who recognized that her capabilities exceeded their own. The Ghost was being asked to step back into the light, not as an operator, but as someone who could help others develop the capabilities they needed to survive and succeed in the most demanding environments. As the group prepared to leave Iron Summit that evening, Sarah realized that her carefully constructed civilian life was about to expand in directions she hadn't anticipated. She would continue arriving at 4:47 a.m., continue her methodical training routine, and continue helping people overcome their limitations. But now that help would include people whose limitations involved life-and-death scenarios in environments where exceptional capabilities weren't advantages but necessities. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.